Well, I'm glad to welcome you back. I'm eager to move on because we have Dr. Catherine Meeks with us. And it is just an honor, a joy, and a delight. Dr. Meeks is Executive Director of the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Healing in Atlanta, Georgia. She is a sought-after teacher and workshop leader. The core of her work has been with people who have been marginalized because of economic status, race, gender, physical ability as they pursue liberation, justice, and access to resources that can help them lead them to health, wellness, and a more abundant life. This work grows out of her understanding of her call to live the vocation of teacher, as well as her realization that all of humanity is one family, which God desires to unite. Dr. Meeks characterizes herself as a midwife to the soul of her students and workshop participants. She holds a master's degree in social work from Clark Atlanta University and a PhD from Emory University, and I am delighted to call her my friend. Dr. Meeks, welcome. I am so glad that you're here.
Thank you. It's really good to be with you all this morning. And I want to apologize for my scratchy sore throat, but it's allergy season in Georgia. And what can I say beyond that? I am always delighted to be with you, Bishop Dede. You know how much I appreciate you and the work you do and your spirit about it. It's really important and encouraging. And I think the diocese is incredibly fortunate to have you as the chief pastor. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine.
Bishop Dede and I talked about what I might share with you this morning. And one of the things that was on her mind had to do with loneliness. And that is why you have this interesting question about loneliness and racial healing that you're going to be dealing with later. And it may at first glance not be so apparent how those two things connect. But I think as we talk about this for a while, it will be clearer. So I want to start by telling you a couple of little stories. Well, first with a poem. I always think that the day is better if you start with a poem. So this is a David Whyte poem that's titled Start Close In. And I love David Whyte. If you don't know him, I would suggest that you might want to Google him and see if you find any of his work that resonates with you. The poem, I'm just going to do the first stanza. Start close in. Start with the first thing, not the second, not the third. Start close in with the first thing, the thing you don't want to do. Start close in with the first thing. And then the little story is a story that if you've read my book, The Night is Long, but Light Comes in the Morning, you've seen this story. It's the story of Mullah Nasruddin, who's out in his garden looking for something when his friend shows up. And his friend says, what are you doing out here? And he said, well, I lost my key and I'm looking for it. So his friend says, well, let me help you. And he starts to looking, and he can't find it. He doesn't see any sign of it. And finally, his friend says to him, well, tell me exactly, where did you lose the key? And he said, well, I lost it in the house, but the light's better out here. So the message is clear and very simple in both of these things. We need to name where we need to start, and we need to look in the right places for answers. And so much of the reason why we come up so short with remedies is because we look for answers in the places we like rather than in the places where they reside. And I think that when it comes to race, we do that so profoundly well. It is just amazing to me how much time we have spent talking about fixing the racial divides in this country and how little progress we've made. And part of that is because we continuously insist on working on the surface and working with externals only and leaving our internal journey aside when we start talking about fixing the racial divides. And we put a few Band-Aids on the cancers and feel better for a minute until someone pulls one off. And I believe that people of faith can do better than that. I believe that people of faith can take up this work in real ways with the understanding that sustainability and transformation are what we are after, along with spiritual formation, rather than just looking better, rather than just feeling better because we wore ourselves out looking for the key in the garden when it was lost in the house. And once you're tired from the looking, you think you did something because you're tired. But then, and then when later on, when you see the results is just not there, then people are getting to despair and want to stop and want to say, well, you know, we tried all that and it didn't work. Those are just all ways to put off what has to be done. So what does loneliness have to do with this? So first of all, let me just say that loneliness is, I'm talking about a deep sense of social isolation, a deep sense of poverty of spirit. And according to some of the research that's been done, 47% of us who live in this country report having that sense, and maybe a few times too many, of being socially isolated and having a deep sense of poverty of spirit. There is a significant difference between being lonely and learning how to be alone. There is a significant difference between being lonely and solitude. One of my favorite passages of scripture is in one of the Gospels where it talks about Jesus getting up early in the morning and going to a lonely place to pray. I think that that's not the same thing as social isolation and poverty of spirit. That is the seeking of solitude and aloneness and carrying something with you that I really want to differentiate between that and the kind of journey to despair that comes from sensing yourself as being isolated in the world and not connected to a community that somehow brings you a sense of well-being. Isn't it fascinating to think about that we have got more ways to be connected now than we've ever had before, and we've got more loneliness than we've ever had before. You know, think about that. We've got every kind of way to be connected. You could be connected to somebody in Australia before I can say the next 5 words. You know, something happens in some little village in the backside of nowhere, and we know about it within a few minutes. And yet so many people are walking around feeling isolated and feeling alone. It is also interesting to note that if you spend your life living this way, that your life can be shortened by at least 15 years. So the researchers say that it has the same effect upon us as obesity, as smoking, as much as 15 cigarettes a day. So it's important to think about the fact that you don't get to just blow off loneliness, that it has serious physiological effects as well as psychological and spiritual. In the UK, they report 4 in 10 citizens have feelings of chronic, profound loneliness. It was so serious until they actually appointed a cabinet level person called the Minister of Loneliness. Can you imagine that? And I notice also that there is in universities and some other places of this whole genre called belonging. There's a vice president at Pepperdine University, vice president of belonging. And at first I kind of thought, oh my God, this is ridiculous. But what is that person supposed to be doing? And then the more I think about it, I really get it. It is really an effort to try to speak to this sense of how much loneliness there is among us. Now, I want you to get into this conversation with me about this, because it could be easy to listen to the statistics, to hear what I'm saying, and to name it somebody else's problem. But it is also the church's problem. And perhaps one of the most lonely producing places in our country is in fact the church, because people's expectation is that the church should be about something that helps you connect. But we invite people too often not to really connect. We invite people to come and sit in the pew and act like everything's okay, and then get up and go home and act like you got it all together when you are miles and miles and miles away from having it all together. And that is a source of deep, deep loneliness. I think that these young white men that are going out shooting people are some of the loneliest people on the planet. I think that their rage, their hatefulness, their murderous spirit is fed by the loneliness that they live with day in and day out. And how do we speak to that? I think so much of the divisiveness that we see around in many arenas comes out of that deep sense of disconnection and internal isolation that makes people then act out and bully and be crazy in an effort to feel connected to something. So how do you get at that? You can't pass a law to fix it. Excuse me. You can't pass a law to fix it. You can't talk people out of it. We have to find ways to engage with people, to allow them a chance to find the threads inside of themselves that can be knit together so that they can begin to feel connected to themselves in the first place. Howard Thurman I hope you know Howard Thurman. If you don't know Howard Thurman, please get to know him, because he is so important. But I'm not gonna tell you all about Howard Thurman stories right now. I just want you to know he's somebody you need to know. Howard Thurman talks so much about the necessity to know yourself. And he talks about people having this inner altar where you decide what's going to be on it and what you're going to let get to it. I actually had an artist draw this meditation that he had done about that with these big angels. He says that they're angels guarding this altar. And I had her draw this with the angels standing there with fire, guarding the altars of our hearts. These folks that have this sense of isolation, and even for some of us, when that's happened, feeling isolated, don't have the sense of guarding that altar, don't have the sense of even knowing that altar is there, waiting for us to reach back to it. Thurman talks about how important it is to be very conversant with that core part of yourself. You know, that inner core. What is it that makes you able to stand in the world and not feel like you don't know where you belong? And it's not something that's external to us. You know, when you look at our suicide rates that are just growing by leaps and bounds, particularly in young people and in the elderly, that's really indicative of a sense of despair and hopelessness in terms of young people not having hope for the future, and old people or older people, want to be careful how I talk about old people because I'm one of them, um, feeling like everything's over and what's the point? Because that's what brings you to wanting to commit suicide. And then addiction, all kinds of addictions. Our drug addiction problem is just off the chart. And we always say, well, it's just a mental health issue. It's a mental health issue grounded somewhere. Recently, Hillary Clinton wrote an article called The Weaponization of Loneliness. And while I haven't had a chance to look at the article, I am so fascinated by the title because I think that's exactly what's happened. That people who are looking to exploit folks, connect to the isolated, lonely folks, and those are the people that you can recruit for your dastardly bad intentions. It's true with young Black and brown youngsters who become gang members, and it's true with grown folks who become parts of cults and cult thinking, that you capture the imagination of these folks that feel isolated and disconnected from themselves and offer them connection. And then they think that you are their savior because they have projected that they have to find a savior outside of themselves. It is our responsibility in the church to let people know that the saving grace is from the inside and not the outside. That's the first thing. First remedy, if we want to talk about remedies. And then how do we get to being people who embrace solitude? Jung had a patient that was just all off the walls in many ways. And Jung told the man, go home this week. I don't want you to spend time in your room by yourself. I don't want you to read. I don't want you to do anything. I want you to sit with yourself. So the guy says, okay. He goes back and he tries to do it and it's driving him crazy. So he reads, he plays music, but he doesn't talk to anybody. So he comes back to Jung feeling proud because he didn't talk to anybody. And Jung said, well, how was it? He said, well, I didn't talk to anybody. He said, well, did you read? Yeah. Did you listen to music? Yeah. He said, well, that wasn't the assignment. The guy said, are you kidding? I can't stand to just be in the room all by myself and do nothing. If you can't stand to be with yourself, how can other people stand to be with you? And you can't stand to be with yourself if you don't know who lives there. Who lives there? And not knowing that creates this sense of social isolation and poverty of spirit. And it is important not to try to fill that up with shopping and work and all of those other things that we use as substitutes for connection, or meanness and hatred and fear. I mean, all those things can get to be substitutes for what you don't have. I met this African-American man some weeks ago that impressed me so greatly because he said to me, he's got sons that are in middle school. And he said, every day they have to spend 20 minutes with me sitting and just being quiet. We don't talk, we don't watch TV, we don't do anything. We sit together in silence. And he said, they get fidgety and widgety, they don't want to do it, but until they can do it for 20 straight minutes, they have to keep staying. And if they start talking, he starts over with them. So they figured that out. So now they do it pretty quickly because they know that the quicker they do it, the quicker they get to go back to whatever. But what a gift for that man to give to his children, a practice of being with yourself, a practice of just being quiet and being still and getting off the treadmill for a minute. That is an important step toward the healing that needs to come. How does this relate to race? There will be no healing of the racial divisiveness in this country that comes from people that are too wounded inside of themselves to be at peace with themselves. That is impossible. And healing is healing. You know, if you start working on the division between yourself and somebody who doesn't look like you, you begin to find other things inside yourself that you would like to get fixed too. I am convinced more every day that the sustainability of this planet is dependent upon us doing this inner healing work. We cannot keep on going as the people we are. Oh yeah, we've been killing people forever in war, but we cannot keep on going and be sustainable with the amount of energy that's invested in fear and hatred and being divided. And so whether you want to focus yourself in on race or poverty or age or gender, all of it ultimately ends up to be the same thing. We've got to get well. We have got to get well, and as well as we can get while we're still living here in this body. And loneliness could become a catalyst for us to do that work if we would engage the pain instead of running from it. But it does have to be engaged. We cannot say, you know, it's like grief. Last couple years back now, I had 2 hip joint replacements, and I got really into grief from losing parts of my original parts of my body. I asked the surgeon if I could have my joints, and he said he would ask the keepers of joints in the hospital, but they said no, because that's all got something to do with biological stuff, and you might get some germs out in the world, and they didn't give them to me, but it didn't actually even make that big of a deal to me. What mattered was that I had a surgeon who respected me enough to ask if I could have my joints, because he understood that was important to me to have a say goodbye to a part of myself. But I'll tell you what happened is I grieved the loss of that part of myself. But grief and loneliness and a bunch of other things, if you stop and say, welcome, I want to engage with you for a minute, it brings its family. And so you think you're going to focus on this one little thing, but then you look around and you got a big picnic in the backyard of your heart, and you weren't quite planning on. And that's part of the reason why people run from it, I think, because it can be a little bit overwhelming. But we have got to be at least talking about how do we create spaces where people can have the courage to confront these very complicated feelings and thoughts in a way that leads them to healing, rather than continuously trying to anesthetize the pain away without cleaning out the wound, because you get nowhere with that. So to go inside of ourselves and take a look. You know, I love Zora Neale Hurston. I'm always thinking of all these folks that they have just fueled the fires of my life. Zora Neale Hurston's book, Their Eyes Were Watching God, is so fine. I've read it so many times, I've nearly memorized it. But there is a lovely scene in there where her main character, Janie, has a fight with her husband, and he's fussing at her about dinner not being the way he wanted it, and he hit her. And she says she saw him in a way that she'd never seen him before. And something fell off the shelf inside of herself, she says. That's awakening consciousness. Something falls off the shelf. You take a look, you see something for the first time. Something fell off the shelf. It gets your attention. What is it that got your attention? And to be able to make the proclamation, I am feeling isolated and low in spirit. I feel disconnected. I feel like I'm floating here, living in liminal space or whatever it is that gets your attention. So something fell off the shelf, and I went inside and took a look, she said. I look at that imagery, it's so amazing. And I went inside and took a look, and I realized I had an inside and an outside. And she says I was gonna make sure that I paid attention to that. Howard Thurman says, you go inside and you see what's there, and you put it on this altar, and you protect it from all the stuff out here that wants to denigrate it and make you lose it and make you think it's not there. We are people who, everybody on the screen, none of us is going to go do any really bad things. We're not going to rob any banks. We're not going to hurt any children. We're not going to steal any money. We're not going to do any of those things. But the negative energy that is managed by evil can get us very quickly with this inner outer stuff. Can get us to despair in a minute, can get us to feeling like everything's too big and why am I doing this? That is the negative energy that we have to concern ourselves about, not bank robbing. We got that covered. We're not doing that. We might have stolen a candy bar when we were a kid, but we're not stealing candy bars anymore. But the negative energy, I like to think about it as energy vampires. There are energy vampires everywhere that are looking to see whose energy can be taken over. And every time we say no to that, we diffuse the negative energy collective just a little bit, and it makes it weaker. So let's don't minimize our efforts to do something about this business of being lonely. The question that I've asked you to reflect on is, what is loneliness? And I've told you a kind of a wordy definition here, but I want you to think about times in your own lives when you have sensed this sense of social isolation or poverty of spirit, because all of us have had spurts of it here and there and yonder. We managed, if we're living pretty well, we can manage to mostly manage it, but it comes and goes. It's not like it's going to go away and never come back. It will come and go. And it's important to name it when it comes and to sit with it and to see how much of it needs to be entertained and how much of it needs to be sent on down the road. It's important not to hide. It's important not to run. It's also important not to be so frightened. I think we can get frightened by these sensations, and then we go act out in whatever kind of way we do. For me, it would be working too much and getting too busy. So when I have the temptation to want to go do 10 things, like with my surgery, I had the temptation to, let me read a book instead of grieving about my hip joints. But what I did was I said, this is grief that I need to walk with for a minute. Not forever. If you talk to me 5 years from now and I'm still grieving about losing my hip joints, something's wrong with me. But to not engage it when I needed to engage it would have made something be wrong with me too. So you don't get through with grief and have it never come back. You get through it, and it hopefully will make you stronger. Grief and whatever those emotions are that we want to send somewhere else. We can't get through them by hiding. You can't work your way out of it. You can't read your way out of it. You can't shop your way out of it. You can't deny your way out of it. You have to walk with it. Otherwise, it comes back in all other kinds of ways and continuously harasses us because it wants to be healed. And it manifests itself in ways in the outer reality that are very divisive, because we've got those inner divisions inside of ourselves that somehow demand that we pay attention to them. So who lives in your inner community? Who is there? Think about that inside yourself. St. Paul talks about doing the things he didn't want to do, he did, and the things he wanted to do, he didn't do. Wonder what that was about. Wonder what that was about. What I'm talking about, this split, this contrariness that has to be acknowledged and has to be managed. It can't just be pushed to the side, because if you do try to push it to the side, it will get stronger and it will come back to be undermining, and you don't even know what's undermining you. And I think that, and then the loneliness that comes from this, your energy being drained off, and this sense of being disconnected and isolated. And if you're reasonably sane adult, you find stuff to do with that. But then look at the people that are committing suicide, committing murder, because they didn't find something to do with it. They didn't know what to do with it. And eventually it won. And they go get their rifles and go kill little children, or they go kill themselves, or they, take all these horrible drugs, or just become power mongers, greedy. I mean, there's just so many ways to allow that energy, that kind of vampire energy drain, suck in the positive possibilities away from you. It takes away your imagination. It takes away your sense of ability to, your sense of agency. That, when people feel helpless and hopeless, they become dangerous. That's where war breaks out. When people have become so full of helplessness and hopelessness, it is a recipe for something violent to happen. And violence ends up to be something that makes you have the sense of connection. Isn't that a pity? But isn't that where we find ourselves? Our own country is way too violent. The world is way too violent. And where is the root of that is the question that we have to ask. We can't keep on just blaming folks who do this stuff. We gotta ask some better questions. People will say, well, guns don't kill, people do. That's just, you're being too lazy to think hard about a serious problem. That is what that is, being too lazy to think hard about a serious problem and coming up with some little quick, oversimplified, knee-jerk answer that isn't going to get us anywhere. And so when we look at all these things that are happening, let's not forget that there is this deep necessity for us to be people who demand of ourselves that we don't look for the key in the wrong place, that we ask the right questions. It's been said that you may not be able to fix everything you can name, but you won't fix anything that you don't name. You may not be able to fix everything that you can name, but you won't fix anything that you don't name because you don't know what you're even trying to fix. And you don't know how to fix it. But the first place is to get really clear-headedness about what's bugging you. Know that movie called What's Eating Gilbert Grape? I don't know if you've seen it, but we can ask, what's eating me? You know, when I find myself being just out of sorts and can't quite get satisfied at all, I'll say to myself, sit down and have a conversation with myself and try to see what is the matter. Can I trace my steps backwards and get to an answer? Because until I do, I'm not going to get anywhere. I'm just going to stay in this pool of being destabilized and not able to do the things I need to be doing. I think for a fact that the capacity to be willing to look across difference and be open to others who don't look like us, don't talk like us, don't think like us, don't have the same perspectives as we have, whether it's across race or other areas of difference. The capacity to transcend that has everything to do with getting to know all of these disparate parts of ourselves. So there's nothing in us that we haven't taken a look at. And when we see people out here, they don't scare us because nobody can bring us information about ourselves that we didn't already know. And that's part of what makes us afraid. Somebody shows up in our circle and they make us see ourselves in a way we didn't see ourselves before. And then we got to deal with that by getting rid of them or whatever. You know, we got to deal with, why do you dislike somebody you don't know? Because they stir up something in you that you don't want to deal with. Because what did they ever do to you? You know, and the story you're telling yourself about them is a story you made up because you didn't know them in the first place. You know, I used to be, with some good reason, worried about Southern white men with gun racks, and that I would see when I moved from California to Georgia. When I did that 50 years ago, my mother was horrified because she didn't want me to leave LA because she thought I'd be safer in LA. I might have been, but I've been okay in Georgia. But then I was, you know, had this projection of these folks being dangerous, and some of them were, but not all of them. And it was really unfair to put everybody in the same bucket. And one day I was driving somewhere and had a flat tire. And I never changed a flat tire before, which is ridiculous for a car driver, but I hadn't done it. And so I was sitting there thinking, how am I gonna do this? And this young white man pulled up behind me in his pickup truck with his gun rack. One of the sweetest young people I have ever seen in my life, and came to and knocked on my window and said, "Ma'am, what's is something wrong with your car?" And I told him, and he said, "Well, I'll be glad to fix your tire. You're flat." And he fixed it and got me going again, and was just so kind. And the necessity was for me not to put everybody in the same bucket, not to try to paint everybody with the same brush, not to conclude that because some white men with guns on the back of their pickup trucks are dangerous, that they all are. That is not a way to live. And if I didn't own that part of myself that is afraid of them and talk about what that's about and be willing to look at that difference and be in conversation with myself, I could just go around projecting all of them into the same bucket. And then when you do that, you separate yourself, you create barriers that you can't cross. And the more you do that, the more isolated you become, because you're isolating parts of yourself off from other parts of yourself. So I want to see if by just your raising your hands, if you're in this conversation here with me, do you get it? Do you find your place where you can connect, where you stand, where you hear that something resonates with you about your own journey and your own necessity to thank you very much, because I don't need to just be talking because I know all these words. I need to be talking because it can make a difference here this morning for us, that we need to be a little more well when we get done here than we were when we started, all of us, including me. And that's what I'm always hoping for. So what I wanted to do is to have you as an audience to be in smaller groups for a little bit, reflecting on this question of loneliness. What is it? How does it manifest in your life? And what do you think it has to do with causing our efforts for racial healing to be retarded? You know, it at the core, because we look at the dynamics, we look at our work, we look at what we're doing, and we can't really understand why we work so hard and get so little results. How does that happen? We work so hard and we get so little results. And I think it's because we keep on looking in the garden for the key. We keep on looking in the garden for the key. Now we're big into diversity and inclusion and equity. We don't even know what that means. And even if when we do figure out what it means we got to change, and people don't want to be doing that either. You know, the very corporations that have the vice president for inclusion and equity and diversity has a corporate board that's all white, or all the top executives are all white, but they've got the vice president for this now. So tell me, how serious are these folks about trying to do something if they didn't change the structure? So what do they think is going to happen with this person that they've hired to do this work? So I think we can't play. We can't delude ourselves. We got to ask these hard questions, and we've got to see where it gets us.
All right. And I think, do we have a facilitator? I don't remember, but Dr. Meeks, we have several questions here that are from the folks who gathered in groups. And I hope for those of you who gathered in groups that you had an opportunity to begin to sort of process and think about and have conversation in ways that brought out new meaning for you regarding loneliness and racial healing in our world, and all that Dr. Meeks talked about. So Dr. Meeks, the first question, let's see, it's quote unquote lily white out here, places where our churches are mostly in all white towns or cities or villages. How do you heal across racial lines when we don't have diversity? How do we find the courage to step outside our comfort zone? This is multi-part. How do we step outside our comfort zone and confront our own biases? How do we as parishes provide opportunities within and without for people to build relationships where we listen to each other fully? So I guess if we start at the top with, how do we heal racially when we don't have a lot of diversity, when we may not have diversity in our own village or town?
Right. And Bishop Dede, somebody noted that the volume seemed low, and I was thinking the same thing. You sound kind of far away. I don't know how I sound.
You
I don't know
sound
if it's,
you sound fairly good. I don't know. My mic is on. Um,
well, I hear you fine, but,
I will talk up and speak loudly. That's no problem.
okay.
So
Well, let me start out by saying that this healing work does not require you to have to be anywhere but where you are. You know, to say we're here and 99% of the people around us are white, you could leave that sentence out of the equation, because the work of dealing with difference can be done anywhere and has to be done wherever you are and within the context of your life. And like right now, there is a profound moment to speak about diversity given the war in the Middle East, as we think about Palestinians and Israelis, because we're so polarized around that issue. So having the courage to talk about what's going on in the country, what's going on in other places, all the work that all the stuff I've been talking about leads you to the courage to do that. And you can do that from wherever you happen to be. There does not have to be a brown person or a Black person in your environment for you to step up to that plate. I hope people can take that in deeply, because in the Episcopal Church, a lot of our churches are 99% white. And we just have to, that's just a fact. And there's nothing you can do about that in this short run, if you haven't done it in the long run, because you can't go rent people of color to come make your community diverse. You've got to live into that, you know. So I think that let's don't get caught in that trap of, well, there's nobody around, so I really can't. It's hard for me to think about how to do this. You can also watch movies and read books and go into neighborhoods that you haven't been in before. And that does require some courage. And I like that Barbara Taylor Brown talks about developing a practice of courage. You know, that you every day do something that pushes you a little bit further toward being courageous. Like if it's in the summertime and you walk, you walk in tall grass that might have a snake in it, you know, and you do it the first day, you walk around the field, and the next day you might walk in it for 3 or 4 minutes, and the next day, and eventually you can walk across the whole field, trusting that a snake won't jump out and get you. So, and it's kind of developing courage to go in an uncomfortable spot. And so you can do that. You don't have to, it's not dependent on anything except your intention and will and determination to do the work you need to do. That's the only thing. And if you turn your, let me just say quickly, if you turn your intention in that direction, you'll be surprised who will show up on your path.
Absolutely. Well, and I think you brought up the conflict in the Middle East. So many people think that Palestinians are Muslim, or the Israelis are Jewish, and there's actually quite a lot of diversity, and it's a much more complex situation.
Right.
I mean, the Christians who are Palestinian, the bombing this last week of a Greek Orthodox church, so that complexity, I think one of the ways when we're in situations where we may not be seeing what we would say are people of color, although I will say in most areas of this diocese, there's a lot more diversity than people know, because of divisions socially, but learning about and being more educated about what cultural differences there are around us, and then in conflicts in the news, how we get our news. There's a lot of ways I think that we engage in that healing that may not at first seem, it's not, as you say, bringing someone in, but I think also creating the space where the church is hospitable and a place where it would be safe for someone of diversity to come in. So thank you for that. The next question says, how do we help people to sit with themselves and listen to their own heart?
Well, you talk about it. You create spaces where that happens, where people can do that. If you have any leadership, if this person has any leadership responsibilities, I think that they could set up things like if you're teaching a class or something, some of the time in your class could be a few minutes of being quiet, a few minutes of silence, but talking about it, encouraging people to do that. But the best way is to practice it yourself. If you practice it yourself, it will become contagious. And before you know it, you'll be talking about it and people will engage in it. It's not something you can talk people into. You have to walk with people into this. They're not going to do it just because you talk about it, or just because you talk about it. You have to talk about it, and you have to live into it yourself deeper and deeper, and you'll find like-minded people that want. I think people want to be at peace. I think people do indeed want to be at peace. And so the more opportunities you can create for the possibility of having peace in your life and contentment. I mean, all of us are looking for, where is the space we can occupy with a sense of being okay and not having to be so worried about, the earth falling apart and everything going down the drain. Because if we live on this planet, we could get into that kind of thinking pretty easily if we don't watch ourselves. But we all want to find those corners where we can go and be at peace. But it does take practice.
Yeah, that's right. Now, the next question says, how can the church encourage search for self and identity when we have often been more concerned with rules and creeds and catechisms?
Well, that's a very good question. And all I can say is it takes courageous leadership to decide that something different is necessary. And there's a willingness to go seek out that difference. If we want people in the parishes to start sitting in the pews, I'm saying, to start doing something different, then we're going to have to offer them the opportunity and make it okay to go down that road. I have been saying for the longest, I wish that instead of having to listen to a sermon every Sunday, that there might be an activity. There might be a way for me to engage with the gospel. I would love to see a little 8-minute play on the gospel with conversation afterwards, sometimes, rather than to hear a sermon about it. But we just do the same thing over and over and over and over and over, because that's what we do. We could do that with a lot of stuff if we decided that trying to find new ways to hear the Spirit really matters to us.
Thank you. Well, and no reflection on the sermons that have been given, but I really think that's a great idea. So
Right.
The next question is about, how do you pray? A question about how you engage prayer.
Yeah, well, for one thing, I have quit trying to be holy. I'm giving up on that completely. So my prayers are way simpler, and I like to iron and pray. I like to write in my journal as prayers. I like to write notes to people as prayers. I've just given up on the, some strict, this is when I'm gonna do this, and it's all a part of, now I have disciplines of journaling and being silent and those kinds of things. But this whole business of, I told somebody the other day, I burn candles every day, everywhere I am, all day, no matter what I'm doing, at work, at home. A candle is burning right here by my computer. One is burning in my bedroom on my little altar. I burn candles as a way of continuously praying, because I don't tell people I'll pray for you, because that's not true. I won't do it, and I need to tell the truth. And so I will say, I will burn a candle for you which I will do, which carries with it prayers for the people whose names I make when I'm lighting the candle. So I have found that I need to do the stuff that comes more naturally and stop trying to be holy about talking to God. I don't try to be holy talking to my friends, and I shouldn't be trying to be somebody different, you know? I used to go, I took literally go in your closet and pray, and I actually went in the closet. And now when I think about it, it just tickles me that I
Mhm.
did all that. So now, yeah, somebody says they sing, they use songs. I think you should use, well, however you have conversations with people you care about. That's how we should talk to God. God wants us to be children and friends and I think that's important to do that. So
Mhm.
um I love, one of my favorite things is to iron. And I love to iron because you just can be somewhere else and you end up with some clothes you can wear later that
Yeah,
have been ironed. So that's a place for me to pray to.
that is wonderful. I was out the other day sitting by a lake, and I just sat and it was wordless, but I felt such the presence of God in nature. And just sitting there, I've grown more fond of praying without words, being present to
Mhm,
God and being in that space and letting God's being uh, sort of be all around and through me. And what you're talking
mhm,
about, the honesty of being true to who we are. I wonder how many times when
mhm.
we're trying to act holy like somebody else, um, we're missing out on an opportunity to not only heal within ourselves, but be a witness to someone else and empower someone else to be honest about their own health. So I appreciate
And,
your honesty with
and isn't it funny because God already knows all of who we are anyway.
that.
So our pretending is so useless,
That's
you
right.
know.
Yeah, it's like we're surprised when I think we're always so surprised when we blow it. And it's like God's going,
We're
why are we surprised? You
really,
know,
I knew that all the time. Yeah.
it's so true. Let's see, maybe one more. Um, well, this is how can we connect and participate with other cultures without being culturally appropriative?
You know, you don't do that. What you do is you engage with people. You how do you make friends? How have you don't have to be trying to take on who somebody else is to connect to them. You
Hmm.
just get to know them. And then if they have something they do you like, you do it if you feel like it. Some food, some music. I mean, they're just, I think we make all of this too stiff. It's not here's a construct for how you do this. The construct is, how do you become a human being connecting to another human being? And that human being comes from Afghanistan or Sri Lanka or Ethiopia. And you connect to that human being. And then you learn about Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, Ethiopia. And if there are things you enjoy from those places, you enjoy them with that person who is your friend.
Hmm.
And that's, to me, if we would emphasize that more, then can I wear dreadlocks or wear this dress or that hat? That's the wrong question. It's looking for the key in the house, in the yard that you lost in the house.
Hmm. Well, Dr. Meeks, you've given us a lot to think about and to continue having dialogue about. And again, I want to thank you for being with us and bringing your wisdom and sharing it with us, bringing your humanity to meet our humanity in this space. Um, and I just give thanks for the blessing that you are to us and to all in our world. And wish you every good blessing. And I look forward to speaking with you soon. But we're thankful that you were here. Those of you who know how to do a response, go ahead and we can do little clapped hands in your reaction in your windows. But
Eh,
we're just blessed. So thank you so much for
well,
being with us. Thank
you are
you.
so welcome, and I'm so grateful to have been there. And I do want to ask people to take a look at my book, The
Oh,
Night is Long,
yes.
and but light comes in the morning, and also to let you know that you can now pre-order my memoir, which will be out in February, which is called The Quilted Life: Reflections of a Sharecropper's Daughter. And it's up for pre-order on Amazon. It'll be out February 13th. And the meditations book is currently available at Amazon or Church Publishing or other places. So please take a look at that and consider the memoir later on.
Well, thank you for mentioning that, because actually we have had a couple of book groups reading your current book and using
Yes.
it as a book study. And for the people in charge of parishes and the priests and clergy out there, Lent is coming, and these books would be a wonderful study. So both your memoir coming out in February, and then we have on our book site, we have a page on our website that has book resources, and we've highlighted your books. So please do purchase those, give them as gifts, just a real gift. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for your listening hearts, and blessings to you. Take care.
Thank you, Catherine. Blessings to you.
Bye.
Bye. Wow. I know we have to go back to talk about convention, but I could just listen to Catherine all day. So